December 10th, 2020 is a day that will undoubtedly be forever remembered in video game history, as both a stark reminder and a warning for developers and consumers alike, because this was the day that the long-awaited Cyberpunk 2077 finally released, after over 7 years of waiting, and it ended up being one of, if not the most, abysmal and broken launches of a AAA video game to date. While the internet and journalists were bashing the game and rightly pointing out all of its many technical flaws, bugs, and the straight-up lies that came from CDPR about the last-gen console performance, I decided to still try and give the game a shot. Unfortunately, all I had at the time was an Xbox One, and that certainly wasn't going to cut it, as we all soon found out. So my only real option was to boot up an early version of GeForce Now on my 2018 MacBook Pro, just so that I could maybe experience a taste of Night City for myself. And it was on that little laptop, playing the game, which some people, bought a brand new GPU for, at a highly unstable 1080p, like 30 to 40 FPS through a streaming service where I would get constant lag input. It was not the best by any means, but it was there that I first stepped foot into the harsh, unforgiving, yet alluring streets of Night City. And 3 years later, over 3 years later in fact, those streets are still on my mind. I am seriously not exaggerating when I say that not a day has gone by since Cyberpunk 2077's launch that this game and its world has been on my mind. Cyberpunk 2077 is my Roman Empire, okay? Like, no joke. From listening to the soundtrack, to that temptation to start just one more playthrough that I know I won't finish, to listening to reviews online, and by reviews I mean like 2-hour long video essays, to watching Cyberpunk Edgerunners and getting my heart broken, Cyberpunk 2077 has gripped my mind and soul unlike any other video game I've ever experienced. And bear in mind, I've played like some of the greats like Outer Wilds, which, as a standalone experience, undoubtedly had a more profound, immediate effect on me. But, because of the nature of the game, for those who know, it's not really, unfortunately, one I can re-experience and continue to delve into as much as I wish I could. So this is a video really for me, as I just cannot seem to let go of this dark dystopia of Night City, and I wanted to explore why that is, from its world, to its characters, to Edgerunners, and Phantom Liberty. This will be a very biased retrospective of everything I love about this game in an attempt to satiate my mind and perhaps to let go of this game once and for all. But something tells me that quite won't be the case. Much like Skyrim has gripped many for years and years, I feel like Cyberpunk will be that game for me, and this is a video about why that is, and more so just why this world and its characters and everything about it is one of the greatest of its generation. So whether you're fresh meat for the Night City gonks or a seasoned choom, join me as I take a look at what makes this game and this world so incredibly alluring, and I try to understand why it is I just can't move on from Cyberpunk 2077. And Night City waits for no one, so grab a cup of coffee and strap on your favorite chrome, because this is going to be a one wild ride, samurai.
Join me for another day in our city of dreams!
To understand where my love of this game began, there is no better place to start than here, on the streets of Night City. These sleek highways and dirty back alleyways all whisper the same promise to those who walk them. The promise of a better future, the promise that if you come here to Night City, your dreams can come true. It calls itself the City of Dreams, where anyone can become anything they want, where you can make it rich and attain your deepest desires. For those who live here, though, they know the truth. The reality is that this is a city that can and will chew you up and spit you out infinitely worse than when you arrived, if you let it. The reality is that eddies in power are king, and even the top fixers know that their livelihood can be stopped in an instant by one of the ever-looming megacorps, either Arasaka or Militech. And for those scraping by, this City of Dreams is really a city of debt and despair. So much so that, say, if you were badly injured and couldn't afford the fastest tier of medical assistance, you'd be left to die, with your loved ones not even being able to afford a proper burial. The promise of fortune and glory is pushed by these megacorps that run every aspect of the city and get rich off street kids trying to make a living. And everyone here knows that, and they're simply trying to make it another day without the city swallowing them whole. This false promise is presented to us right from the beginning of the game in the 3 different life paths you can choose when creating your V. While, yeah, these life paths don't serve as much of a real impact throughout the story, they do serve to show us the 3 main situations people in Night City find themselves in. Every single person in this world, no matter how reserved or stoic or hardened they may seem on the outside, is simply trying to survive another day, to make their job work, to pay off debts, to reckon with the loneliness inherent within this city. It is a city where life and loneliness are just as stacked on top of each other as the corporate mega buildings and slum apartments. And this is something I'll get into more later, but is part of why the relationships V forges on their journey feels so real and have made such an impact on me. Because even though many people you meet seem to be tough and hardened by the city on the outside, there is a vulnerability beneath each that is so incredibly satisfying and often heartbreaking to uncover. I mean, Judy is a prime example, someone so hardened by her job in the city on the outside, but if you follow her story path, you come to see her true, vulnerable self, a terrified woman who just wants to survive. But again, more on that and the characters later. And the reason I took the time to fully describe the city to you is because, as futuristic as it looks and feels, I think that's only part of why it's immersive. In describing the disparity between rich and poor in Night City and the weight money holds on the society, it might have begun to seem a little too familiar to you, because as futuristic as this dark future and this cyberpunk genre as a whole may seem, it is one that is always incredibly grounded in the realities of our world. The cyberpunk genre consists of 2 opposing ideals to their extreme. We have the cyber side, aimed at kind of the glory of future technology and blurring the lines between what it means to be a human, and the punk side, which focuses on rebelling against the system and the evil of mega corporations controlling everything and taking back your humanity. This genre was kind of first defined in 1980 by a writer named Bruce Beth, I might have messed up that last name, whose goal was to kind of make a genre that combined the cybernetic science of replacing human functions with computerized ones in the nihilistic rebellion punk culture of the late 60s and 70s. And it's interesting because both of these ideas just sit smack up against each other, but when it's translated well, always provides some of the most interesting commentary on our society that I personally find in media, as well as where things could go in the future. On the whole, 2077 does an okay job at this, honestly. It certainly asks many questions regarding what it means to be human, how far is too far with Chrome and technology, and what really matters, but I don't think it honestly offers as much of a new or unique perspective on all of these concepts as other pieces of media in the genre like your Blade Runners or Ghost in the Shell, or even something that's not technically cyberpunk but touches on a lot of those themes like Evangelion. One way that 2077 does not so subtly convey sides of these themes is through the insane advertising. The ads plastered on nearly every vacant space in Night City streets are honestly some of the most blatant representations of society's ideals and corporate control of the city, yet they're honestly kind of all genius in their own ways. So we're going to get on a little bit of a tangent from the cyber side here, but because the ads of Night City are ultimately heavily exaggerated versions of ads that are present in our society today, I think. Because if you know anything about marketing, the mark of a good ad is one that hits a deep human desire, but does so in a outwardly subtle way. Here in Night City, that rule is pretty much foregone, and all the ads just get straight to it, resulting in some of the most brutal and twisted representations of products aimed at exploiting the deepest human desires, many of which are at the core of the cyberpunk genre. Money, power, sex, more power, more money, a better job, a better life, all of that. These are front and center of nearly every ad, promising that if you just had this, your body would be better, or you just had this job, your romantic relationships would be more fulfilling if you just had this. These are the desires and dreams of everyone in Night City, because that is why people come here, for the promise of a better life. And obviously, like I said, this is all exaggerated to the T, but if you think about it, in Night City and in real life, who promises these things? The corporations. The same corps creating those ads to sell this dream, to get people in the city to then see those ads, and then it just cycles and ultimately makes money for those in charge. Whether we like it or not, this is kind of a reality of our daily lives, even more so for those of us who are clinically online, and it is just kind of shown to the extremes here in Night City. Between the unhinged ads, the tech, and the megacorps showcasing a exaggerated power dynamic between like the rich and the poor, I think Night City really represents the sociological, like economic, structural, and even political state of today's world, presented obviously in a more wildly exaggerated way. And that on its own could really be the topic of an entire series of video essays, but I just wanted to touch on it here because it certainly impacted how I fell in love with the game and the immersive nature of it. And getting back to the cyber aspect of this game and genre, we have, of course, the actual cyberware. I don't necessarily have too much to say on this topic, but as futuristic technology is ingrained in the genre, it would be remiss of me if I didn't include it, particularly because of the advances in certain technology, even in the last couple months, with the Apple Vision Pro making leaps in VR and AR tech that will certainly change the landscape in the coming years, to Elon's Neuralink, which, I mean, albeit we don't really know if that exists or it's just him tweeting random nonsense again. But either way, the fact that a piece of tech of real cyberware is being discussed and possibly tested is absolutely insane. And for me, really has made 2077's reality that much more visible. This is a world that feels incredibly believable to play in, even though it is not one I would want to live in. And all of those questions regarding humanity and what is worth living are the ones we will come back to later. But for now, we need to briefly discuss the other half of what makes the genre unique and why I kind of really have learned to love the genre and 2077 as a whole, and that is the punk side. This aspect of the genre is one that isn't typically explored in the film and TV mediums of cyberpunk, and as such was a side that I was honestly pretty unfamiliar with and wasn't really that interested in when I first played 2077. But in some of my more recent playthroughs, I've really delved more into it through the street kid life path, Johnny's quest lines with Rogue, and just appreciating how the game really blends both sides now. I have found I really do love this part of 2077, and it's even more interesting because of the history the punk genre has. This genre of media really came about in the 70s and 80s, kind of brought on by the rebellious, anti-authoritative movements where the younger generation was disillusioned with society. The ideals of sticking it to the man and fighting against corporate greed, inequality, and letting corps or your jobs rule individual lives were staples of the punk movement. Even though it was a short-lived one, this movement and way of thinking was and is so incredibly influential in so much media, even now. Music, of course, is one of the obvious examples. You have so many different offshoots of punk music, but also the more recent sentiments of millennial age workers not taking crap from bosses or jobs anymore and trying to fight for what they believe is a better life ultimately. But back in this punk era of society, the cyberpunk genre was born, taking a unique twist on punk ideals and setting them against the most appropriate backdrop, one of the future, where the lines between chrome and music clash and tech and life blur. The cyberpunk genre was born out of this punk ideal mixed with the 80s worries about where advancing technology would take us. And here in 2077, I'd argue that this game's themes and messages really heavily lean more into its punk origins than the cyber future side, which makes sense considering most everything in the game and its characters are based off the original tabletop RPG, which I believe came out in the 90s. I could be wrong, I didn't actually fact check that, I just kind of thought of it as I'm recording. And one of the characters that really exemplifies this is none other than Johnny Silverhand. The character of Johnny Silverhand is the embodiment of the punk movement in Cyberpunk 2077, as he is literally a rocker boy terrorist hell-bent on screwing the corpse that ruined people's lives, and his soul just so happens to be stuck on an engram that V slots into her brain. And look, I'll admit, on my first playthrough, I kinda didn't care for Johnny or his motivations and largely ignored it anytime it came up in quests. But as I mentioned, my recent playthroughs have changed that, and my current V has really taken a liking to his rebel without a cause mindset. Because yes, while Johnny's actions were a bit drastic, he was absolutely warranted in his views, and I kinda see that and understand that now. Maybe part of it is because I've gained a few years of life between 2077's release, and now I can appreciate his distaste, to put it lightly, of big corporations not treating citizens or employees as they should, and feeling like there's nothing you can do to change those big systems that run society. His character as a whole plays a huge part in 2077's messages and the core aspects, which I will be absolutely diving into a bit later. But before that, we need to discuss how absolutely breathtaking the characters of Cyberpunk 2077 are. They are my favorite part, and one of the reasons I keep returning. Aside from the densely packed, alive streets brimming with character, the other main reason I love this game and can't seem to let it go is because of how incredibly real the actual characters are. Nearly every single voiced NPC you come across in either the side content or optional main content are some of the most memorable characters in any game I've played. Their stories, their motion capture, and voice performances are just out of this world, and V's involvement in these character lives are all just so well written. And these aren't just the main quest characters, because most of the biggest memorable characters in Night City are technically optional content. You've most likely heard of Panam Palmer, Judy Alvarez, and River Wara, to name a few, all of who, yes, are romanceable characters, but whose questlines are on the whole technically optional. Other characters you interact with that are just dripping with love and on their writing is Rogue, the Paralysis, okay, don't get me started on that mission, Angel/Sky, and dozens of others. I have not yet played The Witcher 3, but I know its reputation for a memorable cast in Ciri, Yennefer the Bloody Baron, and so many others. But the difference is, for those few, I believe they're a major part of the main story that you usually have to interact with in some way. But here in 2077, some of those most impactful moments are in content that is straight up optional, making the first time experience just that much more memorable. One of the obvious exceptions of this is Jackie Wells. Man, Jackie. For a character who's only in the first act of this game, CDPR really manages to make you care about Jackie more than some games have made me care about characters in 30-hour playtimes. Horizon Zero Dawn. We immediately get a sense of who he is, his goals, his wants, and his genuine Han Solo-esque spirit and nature that shines as a beacon of optimism amongst Night City's darkness, a beacon that is sadly snuffed out too soon. The level of care and love from the developers in crafting Jackie extends to every other single main, side, and random voice character you interact with throughout the game. All are just so unique and memorable that feel so real and right in this world because none of them really feel out of place, and each one kind of adds to this lived-in, real, immersive feeling of playing the game. I mean, you have people texting you, calling you, sending dumb, stupid messages like this one from Takemura, sending flirty messages, and having the strangest problems that they just need a merc to help with. I could spend so long going over all of them, but this isn't a review of Cyberpunk 2077. I just wanted to share the ones that really have stuck with me the most. And let me know in the comments what characters and moments stuck with you the most and why. I would absolutely love to hear your stories. The ones that come to mind for me are sitting by the fire with Panam and the Aldecaldos, comforting Judy on the rooftop after failing to save Evelyn, going to the drive-in with Rogue as Johnny, meeting Sky or Angel and getting a completely unexpected introspective look into V, or diving through an underwater town and seeing things lost to time with Judy, and of course, sitting on the rooftop with Johnny where you decide both of your fates. Each of these are moments where I forgot that I was just playing a video game, that I forgot I was just controlling a character and was V. Moments that, in Night City, would be lost in time, swept away in the harsh streets like tears in rain. I was making these choices, seeing my friends laugh and cry, and deciding what to do with the man who had saved my life. But the most memorable moments for me, I think, are not found in the base game, but are found in the most recent DLC and 2077's take on a spy thriller, Phantom Liberty.
We play grown-up games. We face grown-up consequences.
I can honestly say that I have never played an expansion like Phantom Liberty. It was not at all what I'd expected based on the trailers leading up to its release. I'd expected this high-intensity spy thriller with action, tense fights, and Bond-like chases mixed with these character-focused moments from the base game. And while there are certainly these nail-biting action moments in both the opening and ending missions that rival anything in the base game, the majority of the expansion was not that. Instead, Phantom Liberty's most tense and nail-biting experiences are within its seemingly quiet moments, with easily the most complicated characters I've ever met in a video game. Moments that would maybe quickly be passed by and say Mission Impossible or something aren't rushed here, and some of the most intense moments, like I said, are just character ones. Being introduced to Reed, President Myers, and Somi, and getting to learn about who they are, or rather who they present themselves as, all really culminates in the second to last mission, where you choose one of two paths that branch into two other paths, resulting in 4 different yet equally heartbreaking and incredible endings. Through its overall slow, methodical pace, I found Phantom Liberty just really allowed these brand new characters to breathe and makes you question if you can really trust anyone without a ton of high action, but just in the characters and the voice acting and all the questions that are posed. And those answers of whether or not you can trust anyone kind of ultimately comes down to, like, not really, because each character in Phantom Liberty has their own complex motivations and goals that they only kind of half tell you about until you really confront them or certain endings occur. In any of the 4 endings, you find that both Reed and Songbird were keeping things from you and had their own motivations. Just if it wasn't clear, spoiler territory here, so please continue at your own risk or don't continue and skip to the next section if you haven't played. The ending that I chose, and the one I personally find to be the canon one, was where I sided with Reed at the branching point, and eventually was hunted by the Blackwall corrupted Songbird while seeing all of her past and what led her to this point. This was some insane storytelling and had me on the edge of my seat and crying at the same time, because in Phantom Liberty's deliberate, methodical pace, I had come to love both Reed and Somi, but still not trust either of them fully. We see both of these characters believing that they are right in their actions. Reed having cared and loved for Somi, yet still willing to put her down because of his blind loyalty to the NUSA, and Somi being so blind to her fears and conditioned by Reed and the NUSA that she reaches so far beyond the Blackwall and becomes overtaken by its power. Having to choose who to side with here was extremely difficult, but what really broke me the most was when, upon reaching Songbird, after seeing how she was rescued by Reed in the past and put into the NUSA to give her a better life, that ultimately led to where she is now, V has the choice to let her continue on her path past the Blackwall, or to listen to Somi's pleas and pull the plug to end her suffering. When reaching this moment after surviving that horror mech level, I legitimately just sat on the choice screen in shock, and the realization that I had to make a choice hit me. And then, as the realization of what choice I knew I was going to make set in, tears just began to roll down my face. Because as much as I wanted to save Somi, she was so far corrupted that the best thing I could do was set her free and grant her her last wish. And it genuinely took me a good 5 minutes of just sitting and listening to this haunting music playing and Somi's face in my hands, staring at this choice, before I had the courage to do it.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for everything.
This was another huge moment where I was not just playing a game, I was truly V, and for my V, this was what she believed to be right. And in Night City, sometimes that's all you can do, no matter the consequences. I want to briefly touch on one other aspect of Cyberpunk 2077 that really I think cemented my love for this world, and that was the companion anime Edgerunners. Now, were I to go in depth here, this could be its own video, much like a couple of the previous sections, but this is just my personal experience with the show. And for those who haven't seen the show, I might have given you PTSD with that song, you're welcome, and for those who haven't, count yourself lucky. When this show was first released, I didn't really want to watch it, despite my love for 2077, because of some of the more mature aspects shown off in some of the trailers. But eventually I did, after learning most of those were few and far between, and I fell right back into the world of Night City. And one of the things that really helped with that is that it was set in Night City with some of the same shared characters, music, and the sound design. So many of the city ambient sounds that I heard dozens and dozens of times in my playthroughs were all present in this show, and that was just honestly incredible and automatically allowed me to connect with the show despite it being new characters. and is something that game-adjacent shows should absolutely do more. But thematic-wise, Edgerunners is a darker take on 2077's messages and a deeper look into cyberpsychosis and the impact of Chrome than the base game. Personally, I loved how the show expanded on the same thematic elements of 2077, the ideas of doing what it takes to survive, going out in a blaze of glory, or a quiet life. Lucy and David are such a tragic story because of how David loses himself despite Lucy's pleas to kind of take the quiet road, and he ultimately pays the cost for himself and almost all of his friends. This darker, more gritty take on things that were already present in the base storyline of 2077, I think were a bit of a implication of things to come in Phantom Liberty, because they really doubled down on the consequences of actions in this world and that they're real, and all of that just, man, it just makes you feel so bad or good or whatever when making decisions within Night City.
When the time comes, it'll be my life for yours. I'll agree to get white.
Just want the world to know I was here, that I mattered.
Here? For fools like us?
I have said a lot about Cyberpunk 2077 in this video, about its world and the characters that inhabit it, about the story and music and emotional moments that will undoubtedly stay with me for a long, long time. And despite this world and game being such a dark and dangerous one that many would find depressing to play, it is one that I have found hope in. I've dealt with depression for the majority of my adult life over the last 5 or so years, and in that time I found myself connecting with darker, bleaker stories more and more, like this and Death Stranding, because in many of these settings, there's always a massive emphasis on the importance of trying to find joy and hope despite how dark things may seem. Seeing V struggle against time to save her life, to live with a literal voice in her head, and being a bit of an embodiment of mental illness allowed me to fill her shoes that much easier. Seeing how messed up her and other characters' lives get throughout the story, and their perseverance despite it all, really helped give me some comfort that I wasn't alone. That, hey, if V can keep pushing on, or if Judy can pick herself up with the help of a friend after a tragedy, so could I. I saw much of myself in these characters fighting for a better world and struggling to make it day by day. In Panam's boldness and longing for family, and Judy, who presents a put-together exterior yet is incredibly vulnerable and just wants to be known, and in Songbird and Reed, both who find themselves living lives they never wanted, serving a system that they can't seem to get out of. Even though these are fictional characters in a game, they were created by people who put their experiences and hearts and souls into them, and I know I'm not alone in feeling so connected and comforted by a world that does not care for those walking on its streets, because this is a sentiment I've seen many people share of Cyberpunk over the last few years. And even more recently with the release of Phantom Liberty and people hopping back into the game. And even as someone who is a Christian, who doesn't necessarily agree with many of the more risky aspects of the cyberpunk genre in this game, it is still one that I can love, because it's one that has some truly beautiful messages within its dark pages that everyone can find hope in. That despite how awful life can seem, how hard-pressed on every side, and how despairing your day-to-day may seem, there are always moments worth living for. Moments of joy, of laughter with newfound friends, moments of love, and moments that will eventually be lost, like tears and rain. So as 2023's famous rocker boy once said, never stop fighting. There is good in this world, and it is always worth fighting for, and I believe that there is hope for those who seek it. Whether you're a street kid struggling to get by, or a corpo stuck in a job you desperately want out of, there is certainly hope, despite how dark a future may seem. And whether you want a quiet life or a blaze of glory in your name to be known, the world of Night City will always be one that I love and fall back into. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think I'm okay with just not being able to let go of Cyberpunk 2077.
Good night, Valerie. Today was a good day.